And the first segment that we have is O-Scale Modeling, hosted by David Schultz and sponsored by O-Scale Central Organization. So if we could run the video for O-Scale Central, please.
S-scale or S-gauge is modeling.
No, that's the wrong one. This should be O-Scale Central.
I'm David Vaughn of O-Scale Central. O-Scale 2-rail, models built to 1:48 scale and running on 2-rail track, is the best-kept secret in model railroading. We're pleased to team with Jim Kello to introduce O-Scale 2-rail to New Track's viewers. O-Scale 2-rail is for modelers. At twice the scale and 8 times the mass of HO, O-Scale's heft and ease of modeling create an outstanding model railroading experience. O-Scale 2-rail modeling is as varied as railroading itself. Modern era, transition or old time, standard gauge or narrow. A wide variety of models is available at affordable prices. There is a supportive community and lots of shows, clubs, and events. You can explore O-Scale 2-rail by going to our website, oscalecentral.com. You will find information about the scale and how to get started, as well as a free, searchable, scale-wide product and service guide and listings of coming O-Scale events. You will also find information about how to join O-Scale Central. We promote O-Scale 2-rail and support modelers in the scale. When your eyes are going bifocular, when you need fresh challenges, keep O-Scale 2-rail in mind. Check us out, oscalecentral.com. Thanks.
Well, now I want to introduce Dave Schultz, who is the host for this segment. Dave, welcome.
All right, there we should be online.
There you are.
Well, after a month hiatus, I was down in Arizona and we couldn't get the videos to run. Hopefully tonight they'll run. Now I guess we're ready to do part 2 of what I started on O-Scale on a Budget. A little bit of history of the guy that we featured last time. Bill is a real good friend of mine. He taught me a lot about scratch building. He's such an interesting character to talk to. He was born in 1944, I believe it is. And of course, grew up in the middle of passenger train heaven, as I would consider it. But he always talked about his grandmother. He lived in Fargo, North Dakota, and his grandmother lived on a farm out in Horace, North Dakota. Well, it was a short motor car trip, about 6-7 miles out there. And of course, he talks about how the engineer of the train knew where Bill's grandmother lived. So instead of leaving him at the depot, he'd run out in the country and stop at a gravel road and let him off there. And then, of course, that evening when the train returned, he would meet him back at that same gravel road and hop on and ride home. And one of his more fascinating stories was about he could take a letter, make it out to his grandmother, and drop it in the RPO section of the motor car. And within 10 minutes, the letter was out at Horace where it got dropped off. His grandmother would write a response, put it back on the train that evening, and he'd have a response from his grandmother that evening. So less than 15 hours to write a letter, send it, and get a response back. I thought that was kind of fascinating to talk about. I wished I'd lived in that era, but Anyway, I met Bill in 1979 at a toy show in Fargo, North Dakota, and he was displaying some of the equipment that he had taken Lionel trains that he had bought cheap. They were broken, whatever the case may be, and he had converted them to O-Scale. And I'd never seen anything quite like it. I was in Lionel myself back then, and I would look at these models, and okay, they kind of look like Lionel, but they're changed. Well, you get to talking to Bill, and of course he would, if the engine was too narrow, he'd split it down the middle and add some material to the center of it to widen them out. The windows on Lionel engines were always narrow, so he'd take a file and file those out. And he did all of this stuff on an incredible budget. And so I befriended Bill, and I asked him, I said, what got you started in O-Scale? And he said it was an article in, I believe he said January 1959, Model Railroader. A guy had built a O-Scale mogul, and Bill had, he was young man at the time, but he was kind of amazed at 1/4 inch because all the Lionel stuff was a little bit undersized. So he said he started experimenting because the plans were there. So he would build a model to the plans, and of course it ends up being a little larger, a little wider, and Bill once again would buy models that he'd found at flea markets and stuff, and he would modify them and build them up into O scale, and that was kind of the beginning. And then he said, back in those days, in the early 60s, Kusan was a big thing, and they were kind of a cheap competitor to Marx, who was a cheap competitor of Lionel. But you could buy an entire train set for $15. Locomotive, cars, caboose, the whole bit. Well, Bill would take those items and start scratch building them into O scale models, and never have much invested in these things. I have a couple of pictures that I will share with you here, which kind of show some of the stuff Bill had taught me over the years. All right, let's start with picture number 1. This is kind of an interesting item that Bill showed me one time. This is part of a Bic lighter. And he discovered that little part when he was tearing lighters apart. And he's always tearing things apart to see what might be usable in there. Well, he discovered this is a great looking bottom valve on a tank car. And I couldn't argue with him. He's got, he puts a couple of them on each tank car, and it's rather amazing to look at. And of course, they're free because you can find used Bic lighters in garbage cans everywhere. And Bill tears apart. There's also a couple of handy little springs in there that you can use. This next item was kind of interesting. This is the protective cover to a Bic shaver. Just a item you discard into the garbage after that. He takes them, cuts them in half, and they become the conduit to the water tank on passenger cars. And it just, and he'll build a water tank out of styrene and fashion it. And then he takes this part, cuts in half, and trims it up a little bit, mounts it on the bottom of the passenger car, and it makes a perfect trough for the water intake on the tanks. So once again, an item you throw away. This is one of his Lionel engines that he literally flat kitted this. He bought this thing. The steps had been broken off the engine, so I think he paid $5 for the cab. And he cut it all apart and started gluing it back together to O scale dimensions. And I don't think he's got $10 in this entire item when it was all said and done. I bought it from him. I've got the drive for it now, and it's one of those items I've got to get working on. But once again, he's got hardly anything into this. And these, some of the O-scalers out there might recognize the sides of this. These are those ICC individual pieces that you can buy. And Bill has bought those and cut them apart, sanded them, glued them all back together. You can see that even his roof, he had spare pieces left over a clear story roof, and he glues those together. So, once again, maybe has $20 in his car on just stuff that he finds at flea markets and at O-scale flea markets and such. But real nice. It's going to be an NP prototype when it's all said and done. But once again, I doubt that he's got even $40 tied up in this thing. Although these ICC parts are now getting a little more expensive. This is something I built using all the stuff that I've learned from Bill over the years. About the only thing that I bought here is the roof and the floor and the trucks. The rest of it is all styrene that I've cut apart, glued together, cut out the windows. I found some green tint that I put on the back of the microscope slides for the windows. I've been modifying the doors a little bit so you can see some of the touch-ups I've got to do on this, but this car is almost entirely scratch built. And then this one here is another one. Once again, the few detail parts, the floor and the roof. I built the sides, I built the ends, I put the interior in this car. And I'm guessing I've probably got maybe $100 to $120 in this car when it's all said and done. And then here are a couple that I'm building right now. I love doing this stuff. You can buy a couple sheets of styrene, a little bit of super glue, and you just start cutting them apart. And always fun to have an item that other people are just amazed that you've constructed. And also, it's kind of nice. You might have a one of a kind, so you never know. The previous car, the Mount Hood, is one that I'm not sure if anybody's ever manufactured that in brass, but anyway, I've got one. So anyway, that's kind of a rundown of some of the stuff that Bill has shown me over the years and some of the stuff I've done. I've got about a 5-minute video here showing some of Bill's locomotives and motor cars that he has built. In this video, there's one of a Northern Pacific RDC B40, I think he numbered it. That is built from a Lionel, couple of car bodies. If you ever seen the Lionel RDC, they're about 34 feet long. They're just ridiculously short. Well, Bill chopped up about 2 or 3 of these that he found at shows with broken parts on them and such. Didn't pay much for them. And he chopped that thing up and glued it back together and made a full-length RDC car out of it. So anyway, Pat, if we can run that video. Here we go.
Okay.
Postscript on Lionel conversions. Here's a couple of Lionel Bud cars. They started out as Lionel powered Bud cars, and I converted them. This is an NP prototype. NP bought it in 1956. It has a power truck of Japanese KTM origin, and all the detail underneath is all scratch built. It has a operating flat roof flasher, complete interior, and there again, it just not a lot of money, but several thousand hours of my life tied up. I even put operating doors on it. On a later version, this is a model of a specific car that the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad bought. It was basically an off-the-shelf Bud RDC4 baggage RPO combo, but they ordered it custom built with a small passenger section. So this would qualify as a passenger train to satisfy ICC requirements, so they could discontinue some other full-size passenger trains. It seats 17 passengers. The cars were only on the railroad for a couple of years, and then they were traded to the C&O Railroad for some hopper cars. But this is a Lionel conversion that was made from 2 postal cars from the MPC Lionel era. The power truck is an Athearn Elco PA HO power truck. I just lengthened the axles and put the scale wheels on there, and kit bashed some side frames off of the old All Nation RDC kit, which came out in 1959. And the side frames on this car are the same way, made from the same prototype. But everything, all the dimensions are correct. And this is kind of a representation of a project in process, as I still have to add some details and window glazing and paint, of course, and decals. Unfortunately, the decals have to be custom made because it's kind of it was a 2-of-a-kind car on the railroad, and nobody made decals for it. But today, with the printing processes available through computers, it's not a problem to print decals. As examples, these decals were done by your host and his son. Those are decals that they made on the computer.
So what's the origin of that locomotive?
This is I believe a K-line. It was a 3-rail engine that I converted with chassis system sprung trucks and can motor, all nation drive, and a lot of scratch built stuff on there. And this is an Atlas. I believe an Atlas. It was a SD45 shell and SD45 size frame. But this railroad used it. They only had a 12-cylinder engine in it, and it was 2,300 horsepower. So this is a railroad that operated out of Minneapolis, and they didn't run fast trains. They just ran lots of freight trains. And this model has an operating flasher beacon and ground lights. And head ground lights. Yeah, there you can see them. Let's turn this light up so you can see the effect. This also has some electronic features. Ground lights, flasher, and look at this end here. There's an operating fan. which is basically a gimmick. It's not. I turned the fan up. No, I turned the wrong one on. There. When the fan is running, it creates electronic interference for the flasher. So the fan is mostly for, I guess, dramatic nitpicker effect.
Well, thank you, Bill, for showing us around and showing us O-scale on a budget. Appreciate it.
Well, happy to do it. And I've got lots more stuff, but we just don't have time for it.
Yeah.
Maybe some other broadcast or thing, another format. But you're welcome anytime. I'm happy to share it. And I got a lot of positive response from the one we did. Was it last?
It was a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. Thanks so much, Bill.
Cheaper stuff.
We'll see about making another one of these shows soon.
And I finished some more models. You guys are welcome back.
All right.
Maybe I might even have some scenery done.
One can always hope.
You can always hope.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
So there you see it. Like I say, he doesn't have a lot of money tied up in this, and it's not that Bill is particularly broke. He's not. He's just got into the habit of scratch building, and he's won that Bud car that you saw that at Northern Pacific on. He took first place at a Minneapolis show up against some nice models, and he got first place with that thing. So that's his pride and joy. And I've been jealous of that car ever since, because trying to buy one of those in O-scale gets a little pricey. Maybe I'll have to knuckle down and buy some Lionel RDC cars and cut them apart myself, but we'll see how it goes here. So anyway, that's my segment on O-scaling on a budget. I'm working on some other programs for next month and the following months. We'll probably touch on maybe some 3D printing and maybe track building. We'll see how things go here, but anyway, next week is the big O-scale meet in Chicago. I plan on being there, God willing, and the creek don't rise. And I'm bringing some models to enter in the contest, and I hope I see you guys there. It'd be fun to meet in person. I met Clark Kooning in Arizona. That was entertaining. He's as much of a character in real life as he is on Zoom meetings. So anyway, that's my show for tonight. I thank you very much. And Jim, we'll talk to you next month.